My beloved child, listen closely, because something that once felt uncertain has finally become clear, and what happens next may completely change the way you understand your loving person. For days, perhaps even weeks, there has been a strange feeling surrounding them, as though they have been carrying a decision they could not easily explain. Their words may have seemed normal. Their actions may have looked ordinary. Yet underneath everything, there has been hesitation, thought, and a quiet preparation for something important. And now the confirmation has arrived, they are planning to leave next week. But before your mind decides what that means, stay with me, because leaving is not necessarily the ending you might imagine. In fact, the most surprising part of this story is not that they are going somewhere. It is what they realized about you while making that decision. Someone close to them noticed the change first. They saw your loving person becoming unusually thoughtful whenever your name came up. They noticed the pauses, the unfinished sentences, the moments when your loving person seemed ready to reveal something and then changed the subject. At first, nobody understood why. Then one private conversation changed everything. Your loving person finally admitted that this upcoming departure has forced them to think about what they truly want. Suddenly, things they had been postponing emotionally could no longer be postponed. Questions they had avoided were demanding answers. And one question stood above all the others: if they leave without telling you what you genuinely mean to them, will they spend the entire journey wondering what could have happened if they had simply been honest? That question stayed with them longer than anyone expected. Don't skip what comes next, because the departure is only the surface of this revelation. The deeper truth is that your loving person may be preparing for one meaningful moment before next week arrives, and another person already knows about it. Something shifted when the person they trusted asked them one simple question: before you leave, is there anything you would regret leaving unsaid? Your loving person apparently did not answer immediately. That silence said more than an instant response ever could. Because sometimes people discover the importance of someone not when everything is comfortable, but when time suddenly feels limited. Your loving person had been telling themselves there would always be another opportunity. Another conversation. Another day when the timing would feel perfect. Another moment when courage would somehow appear naturally. But now there is a date on the calendar. Next week. Suddenly, someday, does not feel unlimited anymore. And that is where the emotional meaning of this story changes. Their departure may not be about moving away from you emotionally at all. It may actually be forcing them to move toward a truth they have been keeping quiet. Stay till the end, because there is one detail about their plans that almost nobody expected. Your loving person has apparently been reconsidering how they want the days before leaving to unfold. There was originally a simple plan: prepare, finish responsibilities, say ordinary goodbyes, and leave without creating an emotional moment. Clean. Quiet. Controlled. But then your name entered the conversation. Everything became complicated, not negatively, but deeply. Someone asked whether they intended to speak with you before going. Again, there was hesitation. Then came an answer nobody in that conversation expected: they did not want their final interaction with you before leaving to feel ordinary. Think about that. Out of everything happening around them, they are thinking about one conversation with you. Why? Because apparently there is something they want you to understand before distance, circumstances, or changing routines make communication harder. And here is the micro detail that matters: they are not only thinking about what to say. They are thinking about how you might respond. That means this is not a casual goodbye in their mind. They believe your response could influence what happens afterward. And then came the revelation that turned a simple departure into something far more meaningful. Your loving person admitted that while preparing to leave, they began remembering small moments involving you, moments you may have assumed they had forgotten completely. A sentence you once said. A look that lasted slightly longer than expected. A conversation that ended before either of you had expressed everything. A moment when you showed kindness without realizing how deeply it registered. These memories started returning precisely when your loving person was trying to focus on practical plans. Isn't that interesting? The mind can organize schedules, pack belongings, complete responsibilities, and prepare for change, yet the heart sometimes chooses completely different priorities. Your loving person began wondering why memories of you were becoming stronger instead of quieter. And someone close to them apparently noticed. They asked why your name kept returning to the conversation. This time, your loving person could not hide behind a simple answer. They finally acknowledged that you have become connected to the way they imagine their future. Not necessarily through some perfectly written plan, but through possibility. And possibility can be powerful. Something huge is waiting inside this realization, because your loving person is beginning to understand that leaving next week creates two different roads. On one road, they leave everything exactly as it is. They say nothing important. They carry unanswered questions with them and continue wondering whether something meaningful could have developed between you. On the other road, they finally speak. They allow you to know what has been happening inside their thoughts. They stop expecting you to somehow understand feelings they have never clearly expressed. Which road do you think has been occupying their mind? The second one. And there is more. The person they confided in encouraged them not to create a dramatic moment, but to create an honest one. That distinction changed their thinking completely. They realized they do not need perfect words. They need sincerity. And apparently, your loving person has started forming those words already. But here is where the story takes the turn you were waiting for. Their departure next week may not be as final as the phrase, "they are leaving," initially sounds. There is something about the situation that has not been fully explained yet. Your loving person may be leaving because of a temporary responsibility, opportunity, family matter, personal plan, or change that requires their presence somewhere else, but the important point is that they are already thinking beyond the departure itself. They are thinking about what happens afterward. That is crucial. Someone who wants to erase a connection usually does not spend this much time imagining how to preserve it. Yet your loving person has apparently been asking questions about communication, timing, and whether circumstances could eventually bring things into greater clarity. They are not simply thinking, "I'm leaving." Their thoughts sound closer to, "What happens between us when I leave?" Those are completely different emotional questions. And there is one more unexpected layer. Someone around them may have assumed that leaving would make it easier for your loving person to forget whatever they felt. Instead, preparing to leave appears to have produced the opposite effect. The closer next week becomes, the more obvious your importance feels to them. Distance has not even happened yet, and already they are recognizing what they would miss. Your presence. Your energy. The possibility of speaking with you. The strange comfort associated with knowing you are somewhere within reach. They may have taken that possibility for granted before. Now they cannot. Stay a little longer, because this is where their hidden decision begins to emerge. They are considering whether to make contact before leaving, not simply to announce their plans, but because they want to see whether the connection they have felt exists on both sides. They are looking for one small sign that says this story deserves another chapter. And perhaps the most surprising thing is that they may already have chosen the moment when they want that conversation to happen. Before this reaches its turning point, understand one thing: you do not need to chase, force, or manufacture the moment. If your loving person has something meaningful to communicate, the responsibility for expressing it belongs to them. Your role is simply to remain grounded enough to recognize sincerity when it arrives. Because the confirmation that they are leaving next week has created something neither of you expected, a deadline for honesty. What once could be postponed now feels important. What once could remain hidden now feels heavier to carry. And what once seemed like an ordinary connection has suddenly been placed under a brighter light. Your loving person is seeing the difference between assuming someone will always be available and consciously choosing to value them while the opportunity exists. That realization may explain why their behavior changes as next week approaches. They could become more attentive, more intentional, more interested in speaking without distractions. Perhaps they will mention something from the past you never knew they remembered. Perhaps they will ask a question that seems simple but carries a deeper meaning. Perhaps there will be a pause where you realize they are trying to find the courage to say what they actually came to say. Whatever form it takes, remember this: the biggest revelation is not the departure. It is what the departure has awakened. Your loving person is beginning to understand that certain connections cannot be treated like ordinary moments forever. Sometimes change reveals value. Sometimes distance clarifies feelings that closeness kept confusing. And sometimes the possibility of leaving makes someone finally recognize exactly who they were hoping would ask them to stay connected. Next week may change their location, schedule, or circumstances, but there is still one unanswered question, and it is the question your loving person may be preparing to bring directly to you. Because before they leave, there is something they no longer want to carry away in silence. And when those words finally come, you may discover that this departure was never the ending of the story. It was the moment that finally forced the truth to begin. Something has changed inside your loving person now, and this is the detail almost everyone around them failed to notice at first. As next week moves closer, they are no longer thinking only about where they are going. Their attention keeps returning to what they are leaving unfinished, and somehow, you are at the center of that unfinished feeling. There was a moment recently when someone close to them casually mentioned the upcoming departure. It should have been an ordinary conversation about plans, timing, preparation, and what comes next. But the moment your name entered that conversation, your loving person's entire energy shifted. They became quieter, more careful. Almost as though they suddenly realized they could no longer separate their future plans from what they feel when they think about you. And then they said something unexpected. They admitted that there is one conversation they feel they need to have before next week arrives. They did not explain everything immediately. They did not reveal every word they intend to say. But they made one thing clear: they do not want to leave with you misunderstanding their silence. Think about how powerful that is. Silence can look like indifference when sometimes it is actually uncertainty. Distance can look like rejection when sometimes someone is simply trying to understand what they are feeling. Your loving person knows this now. They are beginning to wonder whether you interpreted their hesitation in a completely different way than they intended. And suddenly, correcting that misunderstanding matters to them. Don't skip this moment, because there is another detail hidden beneath it. The person listening to them asked, "Why does it matter so much what they think if you're leaving anyway?" Your loving person could have avoided the question. They could have laughed it away. They could have said it did not matter. Instead, they paused. And then came the answer that changed the entire meaning of next week: because they do not want leaving to become losing. Those are two very different things. Leaving can mean changing locations. Losing means allowing something meaningful to disappear. And apparently, your loving person has realized they are not prepared to simply let this connection disappear. Now imagine what must have been happening inside them before they reached that realization. For a long time, they may have believed they could keep everything balanced by saying less, showing less, waiting longer, and allowing circumstances to decide what happened between you. Perhaps they thought there would always be more time. Perhaps they believed that if the connection was truly meaningful, it would somehow remain without either person having to define it. But next week has challenged that assumption. Suddenly, time feels real. And when time becomes real, priorities become clearer. Your loving person started thinking about the moments when they nearly told you something important but stopped themselves. They remembered opportunities when they could have asked you to stay a little longer. Conversations when they almost became more personal but retreated into safer words. Moments when they wondered whether you felt the same strange pull they were feeling. And now those memories are becoming impossible to dismiss. Stay with this, because something surprising happened after that private conversation. Your loving person apparently began considering several different ways to approach you before leaving. At first, they thought about keeping things casual. A simple message. A normal conversation. Nothing that would reveal too much. But every version felt incomplete. Why? Because they realized that ordinary words would not answer the question that has been following them: what exactly are you to each other? They may not arrive with some perfectly prepared declaration. They may not know precisely what the future looks like. But they seem increasingly determined to stop pretending that your connection means nothing unusual to them. That alone is significant. There is a difference between someone promising an entire future and someone finally becoming brave enough to admit that they want to discover whether a future is possible. Your loving person appears to be moving toward the second. And here is the part that could change everything: they are not necessarily hoping you will ask them not to leave. They may be hoping for something much deeper: a reason to know that leaving does not close the door between you. A reason to believe that whatever this connection is, it can continue beyond next week. But wait, because another person knows something about this situation that you may not expect. Someone your loving person trusts has been watching them prepare for this change, and that person apparently noticed something before your loving person admitted it themselves. Every time plans for next week were discussed, your loving person sounded certain about practical details but uncertain whenever the conversation turned toward you. Their plans were organized. Their responsibilities were being handled. Their next steps seemed clear. Yet emotionally, one piece remained unresolved. You. Eventually, this person confronted them gently with an observation: you keep talking like you're ready to go, but every time you mention them, you sound like you're still waiting for something. That sentence landed differently. Your loving person realized they were waiting. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for a sign. Waiting perhaps for one interaction with you that would tell them whether the connection existed only in their imagination or whether you had felt something meaningful too. And this is where their thinking changed. Instead of waiting for circumstances to magically provide that answer, they started considering whether they should create the opportunity themselves. Something huge is waiting for you inside that decision, because it means the next interaction may feel different from previous ones. There could be more intention behind their words. More attention behind their questions. They may suddenly mention the future. They may ask what you are doing in the coming weeks or months. They may bring up their departure in a way that seems strangely personal. Listen carefully if that happens. Sometimes the important question is hidden underneath the obvious one. Will you remember me? Can hide inside, I'll probably be busy for a while. Do you want me in your future? Can hide inside, maybe things will be different when I return. Does this mean something to you too? Can hide inside an ordinary question about staying connected. Your loving person may not say everything perfectly, but the intention behind the conversation could become unmistakable. And there is still one more layer. Your loving person has apparently imagined what it would feel like to leave without seeing you or speaking honestly with you first. That imagined moment affected them more deeply than expected. They pictured next week arriving. They pictured everything happening according to schedule. They pictured moving forward while knowing that one important truth had remained unspoken. And instead of feeling relieved, they felt something unfinished. That feeling gave them their answer. They realized that the hardest part would not necessarily be leaving. It would be wondering whether they had walked away from an opportunity that might never return in exactly the same form. Life changes quickly. People grow. Circumstances shift. New responsibilities appear. Your loving person understands that. They know they cannot control every future event. But they can control whether they choose honesty now. And this is why their upcoming departure may become the catalyst for something you have been waiting to understand. Not because next week guarantees some perfect outcome, but because it has removed the illusion that everything can remain undefined forever. Your loving person is being pushed toward clarity. And clarity can transform relationships. Maybe they finally tell you that your presence mattered more than they showed. Maybe they admit they thought about you more often than you knew. Maybe they confess that they were afraid of misreading the connection. Maybe they simply ask whether you would like to stay in touch after they leave. Do not underestimate a simple question like that. Sometimes the smallest sentence carries the biggest emotional meaning. If someone is about to enter a different chapter and still wants to know whether you will remain part of their world, that question is not meaningless. It tells you that somewhere inside their vision of what comes next, they have left space for you. And now we arrive at the detail that may explain why everything suddenly feels different. Your loving person has stopped viewing next week as merely a departure date. In their mind, it has become a dividing line, before they were honest with you, and after they finally chose to be. They cannot know exactly how you will respond. They cannot predict every future circumstance. But they appear increasingly aware that silence is also a decision, and they may no longer be willing to let silence make this decision for them. So pay attention to the days ahead, not with anxiety, not by trying to force signs into ordinary moments, but with calm awareness. If they reach out, listen to what they are actually saying. If they become unusually reflective, allow the conversation space to unfold. If they mention next week and then suddenly shift toward questions about you, understand that there may be more underneath those questions than the words themselves reveal. Because their greatest concern may no longer be where they are going. It may be whether the connection between you will still have somewhere to go after they leave. That is the twist nobody expected when these plans were first confirmed. What appeared to be a story about separation has quietly become a story about recognition. Your loving person needed the possibility of distance to understand the value of closeness. They needed a changing timeline to realize that waiting forever was never really a plan. And now, before next week arrives, one choice remains in front of them: leave with the truth still hidden, or finally give you the chance to hear what they have been carrying. Everything suggests that they are moving toward honesty. But there is something even more surprising connected to the exact reason they want that conversation before leaving, something the person they trusted discovered only after asking one final question. And the answer may reveal that your loving person has been imagining a future involving you for much longer than anyone realized.